The pilot has passed all his tests, all his medical exams. We have at Lufthansa a reporting system where crew can report without being punished their own problems, or they can report about problems of others without any kind of punishment. That hasn't been used either in this case. So all the safety nets we are so proud of here have not worked in this case.
Lufthansa CEO Carsten Spohr, in an interview with CNN, we should note that Germanwings is the subsidiary of Lufthansa, and we heard the CEO there say that the co-pilot passed all his tests, and obviously that response came with the question: had the airline known anything possibly about the co-pilot's mental stability before the crash?
And then we found out this morning that Andreas Lubitz may have had an illness from his employers and his colleagues, that information coming from them. An illness that, according to a German newspaper, reportedly required medical treatment, JD, and a leave of absence from his work.
We're still trying to piece all of this together, and for more on this story, let's bring in former NTSB investigator Dr. Alan Diehl. He also authored the book, Air Safety Investigators Using Science to Save Lives, One Crash at a Time. Alan joins us via telephone, and of course our colleague Pete Hoekstra remains with us from Newsmax Washington. Alan, it's good to have you back. It's tough under these circumstances. You heard the Lufthansa CEO. He said the pilot was fit to fly. He passed all the psychological exams. How stringent are those psychological tests?
Well, normally they consist of some type of written exam. This is for the typical airline. Lufthansa is one of the better ones, and of course you have an interview, not with a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but you normally have management people that do an interview, and they are trained to look for those kind of problems, and you go through a physical, and these aviation doctors, are called aviation medical examiners, are also trained to recognize the subtle signs of these problems. They're not psychiatrists, and incidentally, JB and Miranda, you know, I was I worked after I left the National Transportation Safety Board as an investigator. I went to the FAA's Office of Aviation Medicine. They have some very interesting programs. They're the people that screen the air traffic controllers. Much like pilots, there's always the fear of a physical or a mental problem with an air traffic controller. I'm more familiar with what the FAA did to their controllers, but there are a couple things I'll mention. I don't want to interrupt your question flow, JB or Miranda, but as soon as I arrived at FAA headquarters, they briefed me on a couple of special programs they have to deal with recovering alcoholic pilots that may be a model for this bigger problem of behavioral health.
Alan, is this I wouldn't expect this to be a widespread problem. This was just a tragic event. We'll use it to improve the system moving forward?
Obviously, it's an extremely rare problem. I remember saying on another network that our viewers shouldn't worry about this. Dying because of a crazy airline pilot. They've got more chance of dying from an infected bee sting or something like that than falling victim to a demented airline pilot. But that was focused on alcoholism, and basically in the States, if a pilot recognizes or somebody recognizes he's got an alcohol problem or she's got a problem, they go to their union. The union and the company meet, and they then notify the FAA that Captain Jones has a drinking problem. He will be carefully monitored, and there's a psychiatrist in Washington, at least when I was there, a psychiatrist in Washington, D.C., monitored all these cases, and as I understand it, it was totally successful. I'm a research psychologist, not a clinician or obviously not a psychiatrist. But
and yet, Dr. Alan Diehl, given your expertise, and we know you were just describing a pattern used in the United States with the possibility of alcoholism professionalism. There is something, despite the fact that you're not a clinician, something I want you to think about, because we want you to stay with us and we want to ponder this after the break. And that is the whole notion of depression, how it might be dealt with effectively by government officials overseeing mass transportation, specifically overseeing airliners, and what may be on the horizon in Europe. That's next on the horizon as we continue with Dr. Alan Diehl here on America's Forum. Back now to continue our conversation with former NTSB investigator Dr. Alan Diehl. Dr. Diehl, of course, just pointed out he's a research psychologist, not a clinician. But Alan, we have to ask you, reports about this co-pilot suffering from depression, but could depression lead to a mass homicide/suicide like this?
JD, obviously we know this has happened in the past. Short answer is yes. And the real question is, how do you detect it? How do you treat it? And how do we make it easy or legal for somebody to report this without losing their pilot's license or being fired by their employer? That's the real question. And well, I'm sure we'll be discussing this in future days.
Doctor, I have to ask you, is there a possibility that he may have been on some medications? And if he was, shouldn't the airline have been aware of that? Do they do testing for that sort of thing?
You know, I don't know what Lufthansa or Germanwings policy is, or for that matter, even you know, what the U.S. Individual carriers policy are. I do know whenever there's an accident in this country, postmortems are done, or blood in a live person, blood is drawn, and they do these screenings post-accident. Okay, but to answer your question, Miranda, yeah, that's the kind of thing. But here's what happens. If under the current system, if a person is depressed and they're worried about losing their job, they don't go to an aviation medical examiner, somebody that knows they're a pilot. They'll go get a physician that's unaware of all the rules of what can be prescribed to a commercial pilot.
And on that troubling note, we're going to have to bring you back to see how we keep people in the system. Dr. Alan Diehl, we will follow up with you in days to come, and we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, JD. Miranda.
Good to have you, sir.